hard for people to appreciate the depth of his thinking, but I think with time, because it takes a while for people to not necessarily grow into somebody, but realize how much truth is in someone's statement. I remember my mother telling me when I was very young that black folks don't respond or don't do what needs to be done until they've been pushed down so far and so hard that they don't have a choice. And in the case of this warrior, I think that the time will come when people will have to recognize, more people, some people already do, more people have to recognize what he is saying, because you can't deny it.
Ashe. I think to call the young brother intense is a little bit of an understatement.
Absolutely.
And the week before him, we were blessed to have Oba Anpu, who's another up-and-coming person.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing was, both of those brothers spoke on their experience working and organizing within the Pan-African community in particular, and they both noticed a lack of a spiritual foundation in many of those groups. Now, your position on the need for our return to our African traditional spirituality is quite well known in many circles. But for those uninitiated listeners, would you start out by giving us a brief overview of your thoughts on our needs to return home to our traditional spiritual traditions?
Well, we are a spiritual people, period. You read any of the discussions of African traditions, whether you're talking about whether it wants to be titled African traditional religion or African spirituality or just African culture. And one of the most important things that you will find is that whether the author is Yurugu or the author is us or us that's lost, they immediately will state that Africans are the most spiritual people. Sometimes they'll mislabel that as religious, but the most spiritual people on this planet. We are the most connected to the universe, and that's not to brag or boast or elevate us above other people. It's just a statement of fact. What they have, what they drive, we have become what school their children go to, how many credentials they have, how much money they have, what kind of car they drive versus what's in their heart. Almost nobody measures that. Almost no one uses that as a measurement of the quality of another African. We're looking at everything except what we're supposed to be looking at. We're looking at all things that are spiritualized within the Western way of thinking, within the Western context. We know that spirit is everything. But in terms of the emphasis, one of the things that I talk about, and I'm trying to articulate as best I can in a forthcoming book called Identity, is Mama Marimba's concept of asili. And it's very difficult for people to understand the spiritual foundation of African people. We have to be able to understand that there is, how would I say, there is in the universe, there is everything that's bad and everything that's good. Everything possible is in the universe. But when a people come into being, they define themselves the way that they're supposed to be, what they're supposed to be about, their vision in different ways. For African people, as I said, we look to the universe. We are what's the word I'm looking for? We are a people who look to the macro to understand the micro, to the larger picture to understand the. We are deductive. That's what I was looking for. I'm sorry. We are a deductive people, which means that we look to what is the universal norm as a guide to what we're supposed to be as individuals, as people, as a nation. Other people, particularly Yurugu, who we're talking about, they are an inductive people. They look to themselves, the way that they behave, the way that they think, the way that they have had to survive as the guide to how they're going to define and to form, in their mind, the universe, the world and the universe into their image. So when you do that, when you look to the universe, when you look to the greater good, if you will, as a model of yourself, then those are the things that you pull from the universe and you attract from the universe, if you will, that forms your spirit as a people. And that is what I would argue Marimba Ani was talking about. So you have, over time, African people who had a greater emphasis on those spiritual qualities that were
black school, but it wasn't, of course, as African-centered as we would have liked to have been, but that was the best that we had the option of at that time. We knew that there was no way she was going to be in a public school. We knew there were no other private schools, institutions that we wanted her to be. And in her, I believe it was fifth grade year, no, it might have been her seventh grade year, the school that she was at decided that it wasn't going to have a high school because they didn't have enough students enrolled to have the high school classes. We didn't have a conversation, and that I guess was important in this discussion. Inia and I didn't sit down and talk about, okay, what are we going to do? It was understood. She was either going to be on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays in my classes and in my office with me at this institution, and with India on Tuesdays and Thursdays in her classes and in her office, or she was going to be homeschooled. I think her ancestors prevailed. Negroes did everything in their power to remove me from this institution, and they were successful. But often when people try to hurt you, they can end up helping you significantly. And I ended up with essentially 2 years' worth of pay, and that allowed us to start the school. Not essentially, I was paid for 2 years not to teach there. And this allowed us to start the institution. So we decided that since that came along, I would just go ahead and homeschool her while Inia continued to teach at this institution. Within that first week or so, it was either 2 or 3, it was 2, classmates who also were supposed to be going to high school, their parents found out and called and said, well, if you're homeschooling her, can you also homeschool ours? Of course, we'll pay, blah, blah, blah. And that's really where it started. So I was here full time, but Inia would teach here on the days where she wasn't teaching college. It was not something that we talked about. That was understood. To me, I don't know if this was the way I was raised, or my personality, or Inia the way she was raised, or her personality. But the priority is the children. The priority is their education. The priority is their safety. The priority is their security. I grew up at a time where I was making 2, 3, and 4 jobs, and we've understood that. We've clearly understood that. People can look at a record, and we can see countless names of African women who were involved in combat. And you look in traditional European society, and for me, the only one I can come up with is of any substance is Joan of Arc, and of course, her lifespan was very short. But you have lots and lots of women in our tradition whose names that we know of. And of course, immediately for a lot of folks, the most common on the battlefield in our traditions was Nzinga, and how she acted and what she did. But the list goes on. I think it's countless. And we can think about our grandmothers and our mothers and the things that they would do. Back in the day, our sisters carried 22s, sometimes 38, sometimes 32s in their brassieres, in their bras. That wasn't very uncommon. So the sisters didn't play, did not play at all. When we look at the model of protection within our traditions, that concentric model of circles within circles, the men's primary job was to handle the exterior, to handle the perimeter, to make sure that nobody got past that perimeter, but that was only because, and that's not to say that upper body strength doesn't make a difference. Yes, it does, but we need to be very careful how we define that. Our job was to make sure that nobody got into the village, that nobody got to the community. But if they got past us, then the next line of defense was the sisters, and they weren't playing. And the main reason why we were the perimeter defenders was because we were more mobile. We don't have the advantage of being able to breastfeed the babies. So the sisters had to be there in order to take care of the babies, to do that nurturing, to do that, be that first education, first teacher for us. I don't see a distinction. I see sisters fighting as hard, creating initiatives as strong, and in some cases stronger, in terms of the liberation of African people. Often what we will find is, well, I think this is very true. You say behind every strong man there's a strong woman. I would say beside every strong man you're going to find a strong woman. So it's not, that's a new, relatively new phenomenon where we're not placing women, if you will, in where they're supposed to be, which of course, for me, also insanity since the point of awakening, since the point of consciousness. You didn't become a human just because you were born. And yes, I recognize that within so many days, 4 to 7 days, 3 to 7 days, depending upon the people, that you would be recognized as a living human being in the community. But in order for you to qualify for being defined as a human, it was a function of how you acted. It was not something that was just given to you at birth or because you were a certain age, as in the West. So in the West, a serial killer can be defined as a human being. A rapist can be defined as a human being. Our ancestors didn't work on those terms. Whatever honor, whatever status you had was something that had to be earned, had to be accorded to you by the community based upon what you had and had not done. So when we're talking about understanding who we need to be and the kind of people that we need to be, then we have to look at it through the eyes of our ancestors. We have to look at it through an evidence, a proof that shows that we are of good character based upon what we do, what we say, I want to say what we think, but of course what you think is never never really known except through what you say and what you do. So it's really a matter of us using the guidelines that are established by our ancestors and seeing our ancestors as our mirror. Not seeing the insanity around, or even a lot of people who are claiming to be African around as being, but seeing our ancestors as our mirror, as the image through which we measure the quality of who we are, our character.
Ashe. Baba, I'm happy to have you here, particularly this week, for this particular question. In many Pan-African communities, the notion of establishing, quote-unquote, black unity seems to be a prerequisite to actually taking any action at all. But most communities in the world don't seem to require 100% unity in their community before they take the action at all. Could this prerequisite in our community about black unity first, could that be seen as something of a built-in ploy to help stop us from actually getting anything done?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I can't remember if I was writing about that in Iwa or a Warrior's Character, where particularly back in the 60s and 70s, where you had this major unification effort, recognized that these colonizers, whoever they were, that they were the enemy. So you could have these guerrillas go out and do damage, hit and run, because when they ran, they would have places to go to. They would have villages to run to for food, for medical care, et cetera, et cetera. They would have places where they would be hidden from this enemy. The enemy came looking for them there. But this is not the case for us now. we have a people who, that if you decide that you want to do a guerrilla thing, the first thing that's going to happen is somebody's going to call the cops so they can come and get you. So understanding that, the philosophy in terms of what needs to be done is very different. You have to have a philosophy that is based on you setting the standard, of you setting the model of what it means to be African, and those people who have the capacity, those people whose mental side is not so deeply ingrained that they can't think outside of that matrix, those individuals who have the capacity can see you as an example of what they need to do and where they need to go. That right there, to me, is the starting point that can reach a critical mass where there are enough of you so that those folks who did not have the capacity may begin to think in terms of having the capacity. Of course, we should never forget who the Negroes are, because if these folks are so deeply in love with Europeans, if an African nation when an African nation comes into being, we have to remember who they are, because they will be as treasonous in the nation as they were before the nation was formed. But I 190% disagree with the idea that we have to be unified before we do anything. No, people need to do whatever it is that they can do to move us to war where we need to be, where they're at. If there's one of them, if there are 30 of them, if there are 1,000 of them, it doesn't make a difference. People need to be doing the work. They need to be setting the standards so people can see what needs to be done, and those who otherwise might have given up can now see, oh, okay, there's a school over there I can say, oh, okay, there's this organization, okay, these people are doing some farming and they're trying to feed our children. So that to me is very self-defeating to make that assumption. And we have so many there's so much conversation going on. There are a lot of variables here. You have this is like the third generation of people who have been brought up to believe that it's important for them to talk and to continuously talk. And this is another one of those absolutes when people say, oh, well, he's saying that people should talk. No, people need to talk. We need to communicate with each other, but it needs to be meaningful, righteous communication. This is like the third generation of people who are deeper and deeper in their lack of decision. You have those things come back. And you have the rationalizations of that by people saying, oh, well, we're African people, and in the village setting, if it took all night and the next day, then we would sit and debate an issue until there was a consensus on that, using arguments that are taken out of the context of this insanity to try to rationalize that we need to have this ongoing debate and do nothing about this. Our ancestors didn't sit there having debates for 2, 3, 4 days if the children were starving. And the consensus was not always where everybody agreed. It was a consensus based upon nobody being hurt. So I might win the argument and you might lose the argument, but the argument was settled in such a way so that you wouldn't feel any animosity toward me because I won.
Ashe. Adupueo, Baba. We all thank you for dropping that information. And already we've come to the end of part one of our interview segment with the legendary Baba Mwalimu Baruti. And when we return, we will start part two of our interview, where you, the listening audience, will have the chance to pose some questions to Baba Baruti by calling into our studios at area code 347-945-7680. That's area code 347-945-7680. And believe me, you don't want to miss out on that opportunity. So we will get into that right after you get into this.
Greetings, one and all, and thank you for listening to ANU Asafo this Sunday. I am now bringing you the ANU Nation announcements on this beautiful segment of ANU Asafo. We want to first thank you for tuning in once again and being a supporter and participant in this journey of the Asafo as dictated and governed by our ancestral call. We would also like to thank our Chief Jegna Haru Yuya Asan Anu of the ANU Spiritual Order and Head Instructor of the Sadulu House Spiritual Center for his continued guidance and support. Look out for the new student forum that will be created on the saduluhouse.com website. That is SADULUHOUSE.com. This forum will be exclusive to the students of the ANU Spiritual Training Class Series. Chief Jegna Mwalimu will also offer free as well as supplemental classes to registered students and the general public. Also, if you are an Mfundi and would like to participate on the ANU Asafo show, please respond to the link on the ANU Spiritual Training Facebook page or email omilade@saduluhouse.com. That is OMI.
That was recognized. That was an enormous lie. And now we are allowing and supporting and creating, manufacturing things to support the lie of an African origin of homosexuality. Those individuals who are promoting that are the ones who, in evil reality, evil is rewarded, are the ones who are being elevated into positions where they become the authorities on this. So you don't find those individuals who have questions about that in any of these positions, in any of with any of these mediums to get this information out. This is not part of our tradition by any means. There's so many pieces of evidence of this, just common sense. And again, people will manufacture. Like Some, he uses a European term to define something that African people deep in the spiritual system will do, and it's got nothing to do with sex. But when you use the word homosexuality to define them, to explain them, to label them, then that automatically implies a sexual orientation. It automatically applies a particular dissexual, if you will, activity. So we have to understand when we're dealing with liars, when we're dealing with deceivers, when we're dealing with people who recognize, as Francis Chris Welsing so well brought out, and so many other people have brought out, and they're like, between around 5 to 7% of the world's population, expected in 2073 to be 3% of the world's population, are people who recognize their oddity, their abnormality, and who want to be seen as superior, as the ideal, quote-unquote, human being. In order to do that, you have to make people accept you as that, which so many of us have, but you also have to turn them into you so there's no longer any question about you being the norm. And not only you being the norm, but you being the superior norm, because you've been the model for so long and everybody else has just been confused. So you have to turn the world into you. So if at your heart of hearts you are homosexual, which is evident in classical Greek, Roman society, and in the caves, if that's who and what you are, if that's what you are about, then in order for you to be normal, you have to change the world into that. And, of course, you work on the children, other people's children, in terms of that. Because if you can change the children, then you change the future generation, because if that's all the children know, then that's going to be their truth. So if we understand the politics behind it, not the media hysteria, even though the bride and the groom were the center of the celebration and the ritual, it was a marriage of two families. It was a marriage of families, not just a marriage of those two individuals. African people, as battered and beaten as our families are, as dysfunctional as some people would call them, we still, on this planet, we still have more extended families than any other group of people, period. We still have more extended families. So we are more prone, without even thinking about it, we're less prone to put our parents into homes where we know what's going to happen to them in there. We're less prone, much less prone to kill our parents over their inheritance, because we recognize them as our parents who brought us here and we love them. We are more likely to uncle whoever, auntie whoever, grandma, granddad, second, third, fourth cousin, brother, sister, son, daughters whose parents is in jail or got murdered or what have you. We are more than any other people. We are more likely than any other people on the family to just incorporate them into the family with it. There's no big fanfare. There's no major discussions. We just automatically do it. We don't even think about it. Of course, more and more of us become part of alien beings, then more and more of us will rely on the state to do that. And the state, of course, the business is to separate us. But still, in so many families, if auntie whoever transitions and she has 3 children, the only question is who of the other aunts and uncles are going to now have those children as part of his or her family. That's the only question, and usually that question evolves around how to do this in such a way that the children stay together, and how much money each other family is going to contribute to this family to assist in the rearing of that family. Also, in terms of the distinction between raising and rearing, which Marie Evans, I think she did a beautiful job of distinguishing between that. And raising, of course, you get a child food, shelter, clothing, all the rest of that, and blah, blah, blah. But when you rear the child, you also give them a political education of them, of their people, of the power, of the responsibility of that power to their people. And we do a lot more of that than we used to. Well, we do less than what we used to, but we still do a lot of that. And I'm seeing more of that coming back, and maybe it's not like humongous numbers, but the ones who are doing it, they're more serious. They're digging more to make sure that what they're presenting to their children in terms of frontline work is greater. So we're still doing that. That has gone nowhere. I don't think, and I think that you'll see probably an increase of it as things worsen. And I'm not this pessimist, but I've been watching this since I haven't been watching it since the early 70s, but I've been studying it from that time forward, and how things are falling apart, coming to pieces, and as more and more people get torn down by this system, and they realize that it doesn't make sense to blame themselves because they don't have a job and they can't do this or what have you, that it is the nature of the capitalist system, which is a creation of the European mind, that they will begin to ask themselves questions about what's wrong and what they need to do and what they need to learn. So you should have more people who are moving in that, so that they're taking retreats and they're doing more fasting and all kinds of other things that help them to do this work better, because I'm not seeing any of them stop. I'm just seeing that they're getting a little bit stressed too. The children, of course, are extremely important, but I'm seeing the healers, and I think that this may be a partially correct focus. A lot of the healers recognize if we can get the adults straight, the adults who have the will, who have the sense and the will to do something to help numbers of children, if we can get them well, then we can better expedite the process of assisting our children, because the number of children who are in trouble on so many levels greatly outnumbers the number of adults who are. And, well, then again, maybe I need to change that, because the adults at least have coping mechanisms that will allow them to function in life, versus children that they're children, and they're not prepared for a lot of things that you can only acquire through time, not just immediate experience, but through time. I know that is an important priority. I know that as a child-centered, family-centered people, that a lot of attention needs to be paid to the children. And in that respect, I would say that we all of the men and women on the front line need to be about the business of healing the children, but not healing the children in such a way that they're not prepared to be warriors. That's one of the bad things that I'm seeing about